Welcome back to our podcast, Musings on Better STEM Teaching. My name is Chuck White, and my partner in crime here is Rich Kingsford, and we're from chemvantage.org. Chemvantage offers affordable, high-quality LTI homework, quiz, and assignment apps for teaching general chemistry. Rich, let's get started today. We're going to talk about struggling students and what they don't know and what they don't know. How do you define the hidden curriculum in a STEM context? And why is it particularly punishing for first generation or struggling students?
I think it's the soft skills, or I've also heard them called durable skills, like work ethic or ability to focus on a problem for a long period of time, or talking, your ability to articulate concept topics, and they're so important. But I think they're they can be very punishing, not just for struggling students, but for anyone, because every time you advance in your academic career, you need more of those those soft skills, those durable skills, and especially nowadays with so many distractions upon us, I think it can be really tricky. You can get a big slap in the face and a rude awakening when you come across something that even stretches you a little bit, stretches your soft skills a little bit.
Yeah, I think
What's your take?
one of the things that students don't always manage to internalize is that the transition from high school to college is also a transition in the way that we expect them to learn. So in high school, primarily their teacher is responsible for the education of the student. And in college, in life, of course, we are responsible for our own knowledge, for our own learning. And in college, there's a transition from being the responsibility of the teacher to the responsibility of the student. So I think it's difficult sometimes for students, especially struggling students, to realize that they have additional responsibilities now to be responsible for their own learning. And that's a different context for them. And I think it's something that they struggle with a bit.
Completely agree. I often think about that moment of transition where I can forgive someone for not taking on that responsibility, but then they cross this line, and maybe it's more of a scale instead of a hard line, but they've got to learn how to recognize and accept that responsibility.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. What are the most common unspoken rules of a science lab or a science lecture that we assume students know, but they often don't?
Well, safety I think, might be the obvious one. Uh, I was a teenage boy once, and my foresight and my forward thinking abilities and my risk analysis skills, of course, they're terrible. And we just don't think about the consequences of. I remember in one of my classes, a boy had put a girl's sweater, probably trying to flirt with her, and he put the girl's sweater in I don't know, help me out here, Chuck. It's this thing that would shut and it had a vent. It was this
Yeah, the hood.
big space on a countertop and it
Yeah, the
had a
fume
vent
hood.
that would vent outside and it was enclosed. What's that called?
That's the fume hood.
A fume hood. And he put her hoodie in there and closed the thing. And man, the teacher was not happy about that. But,
Well, I
just
think
lack of foresight.
most college students think that they're immortal.
I also think I think about social emotional learning, which I've heard called SEL, SEL, social emotional learning. And I think that one's maybe even more important than the safety ones. Just basic human respect. And when you talk with someone, you give them your full attention and you're sensitive to people. And of course, most kids are still learning that, and most adults too. They're still learning basic human consideration and basic human respect and sensitivity to others. we don't talk about that stuff much.
No, we don't.
Uh, I it's just it's kind of like this expectation that we expect it of everyone, but I really wish we talked more about that at school, even as adults.
Yeah. So speaking of social and cultural assets, how does a lack of academic capital manifest as a lack of confidence or engagement in the bottom 10%?
Hmm. How does a lack of academic capital? Maybe we should talk. What is academic capital? I have some ideas, but
Well, it's
I'm
sort of,
thinking academic capital is my foundational knowledge.
yeah,
What do
well,
you think that means?
it's kind of a knowledge of how systems work. So when I was a sophomore in college, I was lucky enough to be invited to give a talk at a meeting at Ohio State University. And there were thousands of people at this meeting, probably 100 people in my session. And I went into this thinking that everybody else in the room knew more about my subject than I did. And my advisor pointed out that I had been immersed in this very narrow subject for months, and nobody else knew anything about this at all. So I was going to teach them something. And I was the expert in the front of the room. And that had never occurred to me. And so figuring out the context and the social context and the academic context of where you are, I think is really important for students to interact with each other and interact with an instructor in a constructive and in an instructive way.
That is interesting. And I'm thinking when you teach in front of others, I think your brain wor- it works a little differently, thinks a little differently than when you're just passively listening.
Mhm.
That's a really strong technique where you're asking the student to teach anyone. Yeah. Going back to the question here, it's a really interesting question. How does the lack of academic capital manifest as a lack of confidence or engagement in that bottom 10%? I'm thinking of my own college experience, and I'm the oldest child, and my wife and I will talk about this sometimes. She's the second youngest of seven, and I'm the oldest of six. And I didn't know about scholarships. I didn't know that when you graduate high school, you can get college credit through AP classes.
Mhm.
And that was just a total surprise to me that I discovered in the middle of college, many thousands of dollars in tuition later. And it was like, what? This isn't fair. So I think having an older siblings really gives you a leg up about how the academic system works.
Yep.
And I think that's just a metaphor. There's also careers. And I, I didn't know when I was in college, I didn't know that uh, some programs or more marketable will help you get marketable skills more than others. I just kind of thought there's this thing called a college degree, and once you get one, all these doors, you're going to get a flurry of job offers your first month. Wrong. But I didn't know that. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's, I'm really hoping with AI nowadays and I'm hoping with mentors, the value of the AI and the value of a human mentor are worth their weight in gold to people who don't know what they don't know.
So they have a low risk way of finding out.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So how do they?
Mentors and AI, two resources where it's okay to sound stupid to a mentor. It's okay to sound stupid to an AI. No one cares.
Well, I would agree about the AI. I'm not sure about the mentor.
Touche. A good mentor.
Yeah. So, what are practical ways to make the unwritten rules explicit in a syllabus or first week orientation?
Hmm.
This is a tough one.
That is a tough one because every syllabus Maybe there's holes in the syllabus and testing, especially the first semester. There's been a handful of occasions where I built a course and I'm teaching that course for the first time. And some of the bugs start to come out. For those who aren't in software development, a bug is a metaphor for a problem. Some silly problem that we didn't foresee, that we didn't anticipate. And I like to think of bugs in public policy and in regulation. And syllabus is a form of regulation. It's kind of this written set of rules and instructions saying, here's how you can get a strong grade in this class. And I believe every time you teach that course for the first time, there's going to be a dozen or two bugs in the syllabus and in the program. So maybe trying to test it out beforehand, or just testing it, being open-minded and saying, acknowledging that there might be some unwritten rules here. Let's talk about them and let's put them on the table with the students, with your peer instructors, and just make it better. I think that's what teaching is all about is every semester, how can we make this class better than it was last class?
And I think economists would call a bug or a certain type of bug an unintended consequence. Um, and so, yeah, I agree. We should try to put these unwritten rules written down into a syllabus. One of the challenges is that syllabi are full of all sorts of required elements now, and a lot of it is boilerplate. And so it's going to be tough for students to uh, seek out the important information that they don't know, as opposed to a lot of other information that they might not have to know.
I love that. I love that you said seek out the information. I I've always been tempted, I think every teacher is, to do too much hand holding, too much spoon feeding. And of course, that's fine when your kid, when your kid is the child is two and they need to be spoon fed. But as they age, as they mature, I try to remind myself to do less hand holding, less spoon feeding. And maybe the syllabus shouldn't try to solve all their problems for them. Maybe highlighting the problem might be better than saying, here's the problem, here's the solution, go. But maybe just mention the problem subtly and stop there. I don't know.
Maybe too many students and institutions regard syllabi as kind of an informal contract, and so I, it's I think it's limited how much you can play around with it.
Yeah. Maybe it serves multiple functions.
Oh yeah,
There's a balance.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a catch-all.
Hmm.
How can we explicitly teach metacognitive skills alongside chemistry content to help students monitor their own gaps in understanding? By metacognitive skills, I mean the ability to think about one's own thinking.
Interesting. Thinking about my own thinking. In software development, we have a retrospective. And I don't like them. Most people don't, but it's where you step back and think about how the past sprint or how the past week or two went and what went well and what didn't go well. So I'm thinking metacognitive skills in a chemistry content might be after you took a test and then you step back and think, was I, before I went in, how confident was I about this test? Okay, now that I've taken the test, how confident was I in that test? And I think you just pause for a second and think, and I know that's hard, especially for some students to think in silence and meditate for a couple seconds. How did it go? What went well during that stressful thing? And what didn't go well during that stressful thing? And another question I love is, could I do it? I try to ask my kids this. Could I do this over again? Could I do that test over again? Could I prepare for it over again? What would I do differently? Beautiful metacognitive exercise.
Even down to the individual problem level, you might ask yourself, you know, did I go down the wrong rabbit hole here and just get on a completely wrong track trying to solve this problem? And if I did, then why did that happen? How could I avoid doing that again?
I love that. I wish I could say I haven't made that mistake in years, but I've been in my doing my career for 20 years now, and I still make that mistake. It's so tempting to try and go down this wrong path, but you don't see it. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah,
Yep.
blind spots. We all have the blind spots.
So general chemistry is widely regarded as a gatekeeper course. It is designed to separate sheep from goats, if you like. So, how do you transition from being a gatekeeper of information to a guide who helps students decode the academic environment?
I love that word decode because it's not telling them the answer. I think the answer to this isn't know everything, and when someone asks you a question, feed them the answer. I try to develop the attitude of we're exploring. We're exploring this cool thing, and we're trying to discover some intelligence about the problem.
Mhm.
So I think transition from being a gatekeeper. I'm not crazy about the word gatekeeper. It's not like a teacher is there all omniscient and they're withholding information. I don't think many teachers are like that. Uh, I think it's how to be a better guide, how to be a better collaborator with the students. And and I think a big part of it is enjoying what you do. You're enthusiastic, and sometimes you have to fake that some days. you but you it's fun. You help the students see that this you care about this topic. You care about chemistry. You care about this STEM subject, and you believe it has a ton of gold in there. And and not just the rewards. There's the extrinsic rewards, but there's also the intrinsic fun and excitement about the discovery and going into the unknown. And I think persistence. I think it's not going to be all a laugh every minute. There's going to be hard stretches that you're banging your head against the wall. And I think helping them recognize how that's push-ups, that's mental push-ups and how beneficial that is. We're not just learning chemistry here. We're not just learning the subject. We're also learning how to think. And so valuable. I think that's how you upgrade your guide skills, your coaching skills.
I agree, and I also agree with you about hating the term gatekeeper of information. One of the things that implies is that all of the instruction in the course is at the lower levels of the learning hierarchy, the learning and knowledge and information. Whereas what we should be doing is giving students the skills to solve problems in a more general way. And so uh, I think being a gatekeeper of information is just the wrong approach in many ways.
Hmm, agreed.
So as instructors, we always have office hours. And I don't know what your experience was, but my experience was that students rarely came to office hours. But what role does office hours play in the hidden curriculum? And how can we rename or restructure them to be more inviting?
Yeah, I agree with you. I was required to put office hours on there, but no one ever came. Uh, Slack and instant messaging services were far more popular. And I don't like interruptions, so I deliberately don't have Slack notifications turned on, even right now as we speak. But I love asynchronous conversation. And I've been even trying to do more dictation. The voice to text technology has gotten so much better, and I can talk a lot faster than I can type. I'm not quite. great at it yet. But I used to love chatting with students a little bit over Slack and over whatever instant messages service. So I think that's a hidden technique where we can be very casual. I think being casual helps with the previous question too. It's there's a time for formal, I'm the instructor and you're the student, but I wanted to enforce that so a lot of times so I didn't get a lot of guff or pushback from the student. But I also want the student's trust and I want to go on a little adventure with them and talk about talk about things that will help them in their future careers.
Hmm. Good, good. Can peer mentoring help bridge the gap for students who don't know what questions to ask?
Yeah, I did a lot of teams in my I worked in the computer science department and we would do a lot of projects, almost 100% project-based learning and discussion. So peer mentoring, absolutely. I'm a big believer that I mean even what we're doing right now. Right now Chuck and I are in a Zoom meeting and we're just having a conversation. And I as I say this stuff, I my brain is extremely active and I'm thinking about things that I haven't thought about for a long time. I believe that same thing happens in good peer mentoring. I would often ask my students to just talk about a list of questions, just like Chuck and I are doing right now. We're, we're cheating. It's it's just talking about things and doing that makes you think differently and think very actively. And yeah, you get a little bit of that. Let's consider lecturing. Let's consider a 1 hour lecture. What are students doing during that 1 hour lecture? Most of them are on their phones. But
Yeah.
peer mentoring, when you're talking to one or two people, very, very small groups. I used to do groups of three, two or three, and it's so much more active than just listening to a 1 hour lecture or sleeping during a 1 hour lecture.
So when you have groups of three, how do you ensure that one or two of the students aren't shouldering most of the load and the third is just coasting?
I've thought about that question a lot, and I do see one that's disengaged, and that really makes me sad. I think that's harder to do when there's only two people. Um, but usually, the reason I would do three is because half the time one of the three students was gone.
Mhm.
Maybe not half the time. I didn't really capture attendance carefully or capture attendance at all. These were college students, and I taught capstone class. This was the last class students had to take before they graduated.
Right.
So the risk of disengagement was pretty high, and I knew that. So I don't know. I think my answer is do two people, not three people. Aim for two. Is once you get that third, the third wheel problem, you tend to get that disengagement.
Okay. Last question. How do we normalize the struggle phase so students realize that not knowing something isn't a personal failure, but really is part of the process?
Oh, it is so important. That struggle phase, I think, is so golden. And one of my most critical teaching tenets, if you will, is avoid the temptation to solve your students' problems for them. I really, really want to see the students struggling. That's one of my favorite, and believing that after they struggle, they're going to win. To me, that I think that might be in my top three favorite teaching things to witness. Normalize it. I don't know if that's the right word. Normalize it. It's I want them to appreciate it and I want them to recognize it. And I want my students to do really, really, really hard things. And then I want with all of my heart to see them go through that sweat and blood and come out the other end feeling the victory. I think that's all part. I've done this 1,000 times, million times in my career, and it feels so good to win. I want them to win.
Yeah. Um, I'm thinking that normalize really refers to the fact that many students, at least in a classroom dialogue, which I like to have with my students, um, when I ask a student a question, that student often will think that everybody else in the classroom knows the answer to the question except them, and so they figure that they are at a disadvantage. And by um, treating this as a low stakes thing, if a student is stuck, I will go on and ask the same question to another student. That makes them realize that, oh, yeah, okay, I'm not the only one who didn't know the answer. And so, maybe this is okay if I struggle a little bit. So normalizing means, to me at least, that the student realizes that they're in the same boat as everybody else.
I didn't think about that. That's a really good technique. It hurts to feel lonely. Some of my teachers,
And
I
it
don't know
did.
my opinion about this, but some of my teachers would give the average and the standard deviation for the tests,
Mm-hmm.
and that helped you feel like, okay, I'm not a dum dum.
I think
Some of
that's
them, not
important.
everyone. Some of them would feel like dum dums, but maybe there's worse things than being called out as a dum dum, being woken up. I don't know. I don't
I,
know the answers. I didn't do a lot of tests when I taught college students for 11 years.
yeah, I think that calibration process is really important. And if possible, it shouldn't wait until the first test. In some
Mm.
courses, the only test is the final exam. And by that time, it's way too late. But I think if you can make students realize that, everybody struggles, and that's kind of the point, that they're more willing to engage and more willing to take risks.
Interesting.
This has been fun. This is Rich Kingsford and Chuck White. We are from chemvantage.org. ChemVantage offers affordable, high quality LTI homework quiz and assignment apps for general chemistry. This has been terrific. Thank you, Rich. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, everyone.